Pacing a marathon well is one of the harder things to do in the sport, but if you do nail it, you're going to get such a better experience out of it and also run faster times. So it's something that we need to actually take into account. This video will give you the knowledge to take onto your pacing plan so that you can nail your next marathon. Firstly, let's define positive splitting, even splitting, and negative splitting. Positive splitting is when you go out a bit quick and then you slow down in the second half of the run. Even splitting is when you run the same pace or almost the same pace the whole way through. Negative splitting is starting slower and ending a bit faster. Now that we know all three of these, let's talk about what is the best way to pace a marathon. So firstly, let's start off with the numbers because I know a lot of you love numbers and it's probably a good thing to see this and it might change your perspective on the marathon. So there's an article on this website called Sprifey where they analyze the splits of the top 10 runners of the last 7 to 8 world record setting races, and what they noticed is a lot of the top 10 actually positive splitted, which is actually super interesting because my theory is that when you look at a world major or something like that, the guy that wins might have had a really good day and that's why they won and that's why they sped up in the second half. But when you look at the people that came second all the way up to 10th or even 100th, it doesn't mean that they're bad runners. They're still running incredible times. But a lot of them have done a slight positive split. So that leads me on to thinking, are you actually a bad runner if you positive split? Maybe not in the context of a marathon. And maybe the reason is because you're not feeling as fresh 38 kilometers into the run compared to 8 kilometers into the run. So it kind of makes sense that the second half isn't going to be as quick. But there's a thing called a controlled blow up instead of a proper blow up. Obviously, we don't want to hit the wall. We don't want to walk and sit on the side of the road for like 2 minutes in the middle of a marathon. But a controlled blow up could actually be good. So to explain a little bit more on what I mean by you're not going to feel as fresh in the second half of the run compared to the first half of the run, we're talking about muscle glycogen depletion and also general muscle fatigue and damage. Obviously, in the second half of a run, you have done a lot of damage to your muscles. You're running quick for a long period of time. You're never going to feel great 38 kilometers into a run, even if you're not running all out. Same thing with muscle glycogen. You are slowly depleting your glycogen storage. You can only carb load so much. Your muscles can only hold a certain amount of glycogen storage. So you're limited in the amount of carbs that you can kind of utilize efficiently. And we all know that once we run out of carbs and we're relying more on fat, we're not running efficiently. We hit the wall and we are running very, very slow. And there's nothing we can do. We can't go quicker no matter what on fat as a fuel source. So that is why you're not going to feel good in the second half. And this actually should be taken into account when deciding how to pace a marathon. Now, as much as I appreciate people really trusting in my process and how I think about things, I think there is still a bit of nuance to it because it does depend on how you like to pace your races, what your mentality is, what your background in sporting is, and even running wise. Like, are you more of an aerobic runner? Or are you more of a speed runner? And all these other factors combined with what I've already mentioned will kind of determine what the best pacing strategy is for you. So I think still take this advice with a grain of salt, but I thought it's kind of interesting to know everything that I've mentioned so far. But there is a coach that I had a chat with, and he goes into talking a bit more about how your level and your ability might change how you pace a marathon. So I'll play that clip right now so that you guys can hear one other person's opinion. Hi guys, I'm here with Maehara. Can you quickly introduce yourself and what you do?
Yeah, my name's Maehara, so I'm the founder of Double, a coaching service here in WA. I'm a runner, got a 2:37 marathon time, and yeah, explore some of the longer stuff, some of the shorter stuff, do a bit of everything.
Yeah, you do strength coaching as well, right? So not just running coaching.
Yeah, so we have like a massive strength basis at Double, making sure that I guess you're going to be staying injury free and also biomechanically sound and building that efficiency there. So that's a massive part of what I do, yeah.
Nice. First thing I wanted to ask was, what are your thoughts on, you know, misconceptions with marathon pacing? Like, do you think it's better to positive split, even split, negative split? I think it depends on the person and the ability we're talking about and just how their mindset is towards racing as well. But yeah, explain some of your thoughts on that.
Yeah, well, I think the marathon, obviously it's a huge physical achievement and a huge physical challenge, but so much of it comes into the mental game with that. Obviously, if you've raced smaller ones and you by yourself the whole race versus bigger race and you've got that support the whole time, it's a totally different ball game. I think as far as like a pacing strategy, because that mental factor comes into play so much, when you're fatigued, you're 2 hours into this race, you need to be mentally strong enough to get to the finish line and still run strong. So my opinion, depending on obviously the level of the athlete, is to go for that big negative split. or a really close negative split. You know, if you were to negative split it by 30 seconds to a minute is what I would say is one of your perfect races, just because that feeling of running strong into the finish is going to be so much more motivating than if you're hitting that 32 to 30k mark and you're starting to overcome that fatigue. You're so much more likely to have people passing you, and every person who passes you is going to be demoralizing. You're going to slow down even further. You're going to forget to check your watch. You're going to be not pacing. You're just going to be battling into the finish. Versus if you can have that controlled effort and hit that 30, 32k mark, the typical time where you're going to be bonking. If you can feel strong at that point and feel mentally fresh, you're going to be able to push it that much further in. I think the positive split that the elites do, they're so much more experienced at it. Like, obviously, I'm pretty quick, but I'm not at their level, and I find it the best to mentally be feeling strong at that 30-ish K mark and be able to push in, and that's when I've done my best races, versus the times where I've gone that little bit faster and maybe I could hold that pace, but it gets to that hard part. I start to fade a little bit. People start to pass me. That's where the challenge comes in, and that's where I start to drop after that.
Yeah, definitely. So with your own pacing, do you try and set like a checkpoint at a certain point and try and decide before the race that I want to feel good at this point still, kind of thing?
100%. Yeah, like I'll have my goal time, and I'll probably set it, you know, just on the higher end. So if I'm going for 2:30, I want to pass the halfway mark at 1:16, for example. So I've got a little bit of time to make up. I want to make sure I'm feeling fresh, and I think personally assessing every 5 to 10k and saying like, okay, am I feeling good? Cool. What percentage? For me, it's like, am I halfway through and feeling halfway cooked? Okay, then that's relative. That's fine. If I'm feeling that little bit overdone at the halfway mark, just dialing it back a little bit and making sure I understand the course and where I can push as well.
And I know this sounds like pretty obvious to us because we're pretty experienced as runners already, but it's always hard to explain the concept of how easy any pace will feel at the start. You know, you could be running 5k pace and it will feel easy for the first K, but do you have any good cues or tips that you tell your clients and athletes in terms of how to hold back enough at the start of a marathon to make sure they're not getting cooked later?
I guess just using sort of some general pacing rules, like if you've done a half in the lead up, and understanding like double your half and add sort of 5 to 10 minutes is going to be a good goal time to work towards, and making sure that you don't pass that. Like once you've got your pacing plan in play, if you're banking 5 seconds every K at the start, it's going to come back to bite you and cost you 10 seconds a K at the end. So you'd rather be a little bit more conservative and making sure that, all right, am I, running under pace, but am I fueling effectively? Focus on those other things at the start. Focus on feeling fresh. Focus on running with good form. And those things are going to carry a lot longer.
Quick little intermission. The rest of this video is going to be very, very informative. So make sure to watch the whole thing and leave a like, comment below for more videos like this. So I'm actually really glad I had this conversation with Coach Maehara because he raised a pretty good point, and it does really depend on your running background and your ability. Because for someone that's new to have to go through a positive split, and because they're not elite and they don't have that physiological capacity to be able to cling on for dear life for a longer amount of time, it's probably worse off in the long term as well if the person has to experience what it's like to blow up that much and go through that pain, and they might not want to do more marathons in the future if they pace it wrong. So it might be more sensible and make more sense long term to actually pace and aim as best as possible for a negative split so that they don't get discouraged for future races. So I think it is very, very highly contextual, which is why it's really good that we're making this video and discussing it from many different angles, because it really does depend on you. So you have to think about and make the right decision on how you think the best approaches to the marathon. I think I have enough experience where I'm not gonna blow up completely, and therefore I still think that I would benefit from a slight positive split, but I would actually go in with the intention of even splitting, which usually ends up with a slight positive split if done correctly. So I wouldn't just go out and be like, I definitely want to be slower in the second half. I would actually try and even split the whole thing. But like I said earlier, you're never going to feel better at 38k compared to 8k. So usually if you try and even split, you'll end up with that slight positive split, which is what I personally think would help me as a person that thinks they're good at clinging on for dear life and, you know, not bleeding too many seconds per kilometer in the second half of the race, even if things get hard. So this is actually a good segue for me to talk a little bit about mental strength. And obviously with the distance being longer, and if we're even talking about ultra marathons, the mental component is actually huge, because you can only become so physiologically fit, and you're eventually going to be hindered by how strong you are mentally, because that becomes a bigger part or proportion of your performance. So that's why more elite athletes are looking into sports psych a little bit more. So the couple things I wanted to talk about regarding this topic is, one, to kind of set yourself this restriction of how many seconds per kilometer you're going to allow yourself to bleed. Obviously, we don't want to plan to blow up, but if in the case that things get hard, if you have a mental note in advance before the race on how many seconds per kilometer is acceptable to slow down, you'll kind of go in having that plan subconsciously in the back of your head. So when things get hard, you're like, all right, I'm sticking to the plan. I'm not slowing down by any more than 5 seconds per kilometer of my goal pace. And that's going to give you that motivation to kind of stick to your word and essentially not embarrass yourself. So that's a tactic that some people use. I don't know if sports psychologists agree with what I'm saying, but I personally do that, especially for courses that are completely flat. So I want to set that restriction of not blowing up by more than a certain amount of seconds per kilometer. And that's going to depend on the race, whether it's 50K, 42K, half marathon or whatever. So this applies across different distances as well. So now I want to talk a little bit about fatigue and motivation. So these are two interesting concepts that kind of interplay with each other to give us some interesting results and can be game-changing in the context of running a marathon and pacing it well. So Steve Magnus actually made a podcast with, I forgot who it was, but I'll link it in the description because I think it's a really interesting listen. But essentially what the video was talking about was that depending on your motivation levels, the time at which fatigue sets in could be different. So let's compare two scenarios, one where you're running towards picking up a 50-cent coin off the floor. That's the example that they used in the podcast. 50 cents is not that much money. I don't really care about it. I'm not desperate to do that. So yeah, my motivation for running quick to get that is actually pretty low. But if I have a family member being attacked by a lion or something like that, obviously I'm gonna, try and get there as soon as possible and help them out. And therefore my mind is gonna override fatigue a little bit and actually, forget about it and, try and get from point A to point B to save my family member as soon as possible. So depending on context, your fatigue level barrier or threshold is going to be drastically different. And this is even the same inside a race. Like if you're racing and you kind of know that there's medical help available, even if you have to DNF at any point during the race, you're probably going to push that red line a little bit further, because fatigue is basically your body telling you to not do anything stupid so that you don't end up passing out or whatever. But if you know that you have that help, you're probably going to be able to override that a little bit more. So that's why you see people in a race being able to exert more and do way more than they can in training. So all this psychology stuff is actually super interesting, and I'm not going to pretend like I know everything about it, but that's the small concept that I got from this podcast episode, which I found really interesting. So definitely go check it out. But what this actually means in the context of a marathon is that you actually don't want to go into a marathon thinking it's going to be super duper easy, because then you're going to prioritize it pretty low. And then any bit of adversity or when it gets tough, like even a tiny bit, you're probably going to give up, which is actually not good. So we want to make sure that our fatigue motivation is actually pretty high. So we don't want to go in being cocky and thinking it's super easy, but we also don't want to psych ourselves out and think that it's really, really hard and dangerous. So we need that sweet spot. We want to understand that a marathon is tough. It's going to get tiring in the second half of the run. So it's good to kind of expect that, but it's good to know and believe in yourself that it's a manageable amount. So you need that sweet spot. And that's going to be completely different for everyone depending on your psychology background and what your mentality is normally during a race, because everyone is different. So I can't really give you specific advice on how hard you should expect the race to be, but you'll play around with that with different races and you'll learn over time. Because running marathons is basically learning from all these different experiences, getting a lot of data points from different runs, different races in the past, different workouts, and then you'll get a good idea of what's possible in the marathon. What pace can you sustain for 42 kilometers? The more data you have, the better educated guess you can have, and that's when people pace marathons well. For example, I've done 2 road runs, one's a 52K, one's a 56K, where I paced fairly evenly. I guess I blew up a tiny bit, but because I've run for more than a marathon, I know what I can hold for more than a marathon when I'm fit. And those 2 data points are huge factors that I consider when I'm trying to work out what I can run in a marathon. So it's nice to have that data point. What have I held for 52K in the past? What have I held for 30Ks in the past? How did that feel? How did that feel? What's my 10K pace currently? What's my most recent 5K time? Also taking into account the terrain, the course, the elevation, the humidity, the dew point, the temperature, all these factors also come into play. Taking all that into account, you have a lot of data points, and then you can make a very accurate prediction on what you might run. With the athletes that I coach, a lot of people have praised me on how well I can predict what they're going to run. And that's because I've seen what workouts they've done. I've asked them for feedback on how that workout felt, how that race felt, what their PBs are before I started coaching them. And all these data points and knowing when they did their PBs and stuff, that would give me some sort of idea in my head of what's possible in this next race coming up. Even though I don't have a perfect algorithm in my head, I have some sort of an algorithm in the background of my head where I can kind of work out, you know, all these factors combined. This is my guess on what I think you can run. And basically, the more you become smart in terms of that, you're going to pace marathons a lot better. So running, again, is all about experience. That build up over time, the accumulation of experience and knowledge and good base building and good training and consistency, that's going to help you become more predictable in terms of every race that you go into. Even if you're unfit, you'll still have that reference point. What did you do when you were fit? What did you do when you were unfit last time? And try and work out what's possible within the context that you're in right now. One other important factor with marathon pacing is to know the course well. So obviously it's really handy if you know what's coming up and stuff like that, because you know when you want to get in a rhythm and run at an even pace and maybe even a bit faster because you know that there's another slower part of the course coming later. So if you hyperfixate on going slow at the start and fast at the end, or faster at the start and slow at the end, and go in with that sort of exact plan without really looking at the course, you're going to hyperfixate on sticking to that plan. Whereas if you know the course well, it's good to know when you can hit a rhythm and kind of bank that little bit of time, because you know it's an easy place to bank time. So as an example, if you are a viewer that's done the Sydney Marathon or knows the Sydney Marathon course, you'll know that Anzac Parade is a flat road and it just goes on for a while and it's just a long out and back. Obviously it's quite boring, but it's an easy place to actually get into a rhythm and maintain pace compared to somewhere like Centennial where you have a bit more of an undulating terrain, or, you know, Botanical Gardens where you're really tired and, you know, you've also got this undulating terrain to navigate. But Anzac Parade, it's in the middle portion of the race. It's an easy place to lock into a slightly faster pace to kind of bank that little bit of time. So again, be smart about how you pace the race. It depends on the course. It depends on so many factors. So try and think as much as possible before deciding how to pace a marathon. One little final tip I might talk about is whether you're good at downhill running or not. So some people like use the downhill, make sure you let gravity do the work and make sure you speed up. But in reality, if you don't know how to run downhill in an efficient way, and efficient doesn't mean really good form, like it actually does include counterbalance with your arms and that sort of thing. So it might not look pretty, but it's an efficient way where you pick up the cadence, you don't lean back too much, so there's not as much braking force. You're trying to like lean into the hill a little bit, but not too much either. You're trying to not destroy the quads. Again, I can make a whole video on downhill running in the future, but if you don't know how to do that, then you probably don't want to actually speed up in the downhill, because that's probably going to ruin your quads and you might not pace it as well as you want. So it depends on that sort of context too, which is why, as always, with every video I've ever made, there's no perfect answer for everyone in this video. But as always, the goal of my YouTube channel is to look at different topics from many different angles, different contexts, because every single one of you viewers are different. And therefore, as long as you take everything in this video into account, you'll probably come up with a good racing strategy for the future. If you want personalized advice, I do running coaching. I do 60-minute consultations as well. If you don't want to get coached from week to week and you just want to have one-hour conversation with me to ask me anything you want in 1 hour, feel free to use that service in the description below as well. You'll get a lot out of it in 1 hour. Yes, it's $95, but I've actually done more than 20 of these already and everyone has found it super handy. So definitely highly recommend. And yeah, I'd love to chat with a few more people and go into more detail and be more specific to the individual as well. Anyway, we'll leave it there. Thank you so much for watching. As always, there's a link to buy me coffee in the description. If you have the funds and means to donate, please do so, because I am a student trying to get by. But apart from that, leave a like on the video, comment below, and I'll see you in the next video.